Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. And if you notice, the things behind me have changed. Someone sent me this really cool Earth banner, and I don't know who sent it to me. So if you want to remain anonymous, that's fine. But if you want to tell me who it was that sent it, I'd like to thank you. So thank you for the really cool Earth banner behind me. I've got the door open today. I'm hoping that nothing gets in the way, like dogs or birds or chainsaws or power mowers or leaf blowers or coyotes or anything like that. Wild bears. Hopefully nothing will get in the way of this video making. I kind of like doing it with the door open and the natural light and all that kind of stuff. It looks less dreary. I don't like it when it looks dreary, you know. It just bums me out, you know. So let's start this video. I'm just going to read this one article. This is Darjamel's latest, and his articles tend to usually run a little long, so I'm going to give this article its own video. The Arctic is thawing so fast, scientists are losing their measuring tools. This is from June 3rd. And it starts out with a poem. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around the primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years, and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? And that's from Rilke. Rilke. I have never known how to pronounce that name, Rilke. Rilke, from the Book of Hours. I'm sure somebody will correct me, and thank you in advance for your help. We've never experienced anything like this. We are living with the full knowledge of our collapsing biosphere and watching huge portions of it vanishing before our very eyes. Meanwhile, the Industrial Growth Society, as eco-philosopher, author, and Buddhist scholar Joanna Macy calls it, continues to grind on, and this veneer of normalcy persists one more day. Yet simultaneously, a great awakening is occurring. Millions of people around the world are rising to protect what remains, working to mitigate the damage and to adapt to the drastically changing world. They are working to hold space for that which, despite seemingly overwhelming odds, may continue in the wake of this great collapse. I have been giving a lot of lectures lately about the climate catastrophe that is upon us, and have increasingly been led to discuss grief. My own experience has shown me that only by facing what is happening head-on and allowing my heart to break can I begin to respond accordingly. I find myself led back to one of my teachers, the aforementioned Joanna Macy. Refusing to feel pain and becoming incapable of feeling the pain, which is actually the root meaning of apathy, refusal to suffer, that makes us stupid and half alive, Macy told me in an interview. She described how that refusal to feel pain doesn't mute the sense that there is something wrong. So people simply take that sense and project anxieties elsewhere, usually onto marginalized communities. Not feeling the pain is extremely costly, Macy said. Looking out into the world right now, the proof of what she said is surrounding us, starting in the White House and filtering down throughout the dominant colonialist society. And I'm also actually seeing that, I just wanted to interject, I'm also seeing that, I'm seeing it a lot on social media, and it's bothersome to me. I'm seeing people saying stuff like positive vibes only, and just being, everything is super positive thinking and super law of attraction and super optimism. And I don't begrudge anybody their super optimism and law of attraction. Unfortunately, that doesn't, it actually doesn't work or doesn't stand in the face of reality. At least to my observation so far. Maybe I might be wrong. Maybe maybe there might be such a wave of positive thinking and attracting such beautiful thoughts and actions with our thoughts and actions that somehow we may overwhelm this destruction of the biosphere. But from what I can see, sitting where I'm sitting, we are destroying the biosphere, and the data tells us we are destroying the biosphere hand over fist. That is happening, and we are starting to see the consequences of it. And the law of attraction and positive thinking didn't save a lot of farmers from getting flooded this year. It didn't save a lot of fields from not being planted this year. It didn't save people from Hurricane Harvey a few years ago. It didn't save, it didn't save people from forest fires. It's not going to save people from the inevitable climate catastrophe that's going to, hit us. You're just outrunning it for a few more weeks or months or years. And, again, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, and I love the positive thinking and I love all the optimism, but you're going to have to align that somehow with reality at some moment. And I don't want people to walk into a really ugly truth, with their minds completely like, oh, everything's great, and wham, into the brick wall we go. But I digress. Macy created a framework for personal and social change called The Work That Reconnects, and gives workshops on how to apply that framework. In these workshops and in our conversations, Macy has repeated this to me. The most radical thing any of us can do at this time is to be fully present to what is happening in the world. And that is radical. And so over the years, I've aimed to be fully present. And I've had my heart broken, and I've now had enough practice at this that I have seen repeatedly the transformational qualities of despair and grief in the face of our overwhelming climate and political crises. That grief is transformed into a new clarity of vision and a depth of passion for action that was previously inaccessible. It brings a new way of seeing the world as our larger living body, freeing us from assumptions and attitudes that now threaten the continuity of life on Earth. Macy has told me of this experience. So, dear reader, I urge you to find your own work that reconnects, or to find another way to ground yourself as you read on, and as we each travel through another crisis-ridden day into an increasingly bleak future. That future is perhaps most visible at the poles. Greenland is melting much faster than previously understood, as melting has increased sixfold in recent decades, according to a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. We wanted to get a long, precise record of mass balance in Greenland that included the transition when the climate of the planet started to drift off natural variability, which occurred in the 1980s. Study co-author Eric Reno told CNN the study places the recent 20 years evolution in a broader context to illustrate how dramatically the mass loss has been increasing in Greenland in response to climate warming, Reno added. As glaciers will continue to speed up and snow melt from the top, we can foresee a continuous increase in the rate of mass loss and a contribution to sea level rise that will continue to increase more rapidly every year. The study also shows how sea level rise is accelerating and will continue to do so with each passing year as the effects compound upon themselves. On that note, Indonesia recently announced it will be moving its capital city of Jakarta, partly due to the sinking of the land and sea level rise. This is a city of 10 million people. Permafrost in the Arctic is now thawing so fast that scientists are literally losing their measuring equipment. This is due to the fact that instead of there being just a few centimeters of thawing each year, now several meters of soil can become destabilized in a matter of days. Adding insult to injury, another study revealed that this permafrost collapse is further accelerating the release of carbon into the atmosphere, possibly even doubling the amount of warming coming from greenhouse gases released from the tundra. Already in Greenland, the ice sheets melt season began about a month early, while in Alaska, several rivers saw winter ice break up on their earliest dates on record. The recent UN report showing that 1 million species are now in danger of going extinct has grave implications for the future of humanity. Human society is under urgent threat because the global ecosystem upon which we depend is quite literally under threat of unraveling. The health of ecosystems on which we and other species depend is deteriorating more rapidly than ever. We are eroding the very foundations of economies, livelihoods, food security, health, and quality of life worldwide. Robert Watson, the chair of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, told The Guardian. Earth, disconcertingly, since 2001, forests in Canada have released more carbon than they have sequestered. This is due largely to climate disruption-fueled drought, higher temperatures, and wildfires. To give you an idea of what this means, in 2015, Canada's forests emitted the equivalent of 231 million metric tons of CO2. By comparison, the total population of the city of Calgary emitted 18.3 million metric tons of CO2, merely a fraction of the amount released by the forests, largely via drought and wildfires. Following ongoing protests and pressure from the activist organization Extinction Rebellion, the Welsh government declared a climate emergency, noting that Wales' health, economy, infrastructure, and natural environment are all under threat from the impacts of human-caused climate disruption. Around the same time, the Republic of Ireland also declared a climate biodiversity emergency. Green Party leader Eamon Ryan told the BBC that declaring an emergency means absolutely nothing unless there is action to back it up. That means the government having to do things they don't want to do. In Canada, the Ottawa City Council has declared a climate emergency, joining several other Canadian municipalities in announcing the declaration. The vote freed up $250,000 to be used to accelerate studies around moving the city into renewable energy and meeting greenhouse gas emission targets. The town of Old Crow, Yukon, also declared a climate emergency as well. It's going to be the blink of an eye before my great-grandchild is living in a completely different territory, and if that's not an emergency, I don't know what is. Dana Tizia Tram, chief of the Vuntut Gwich'in First Nation, told the CBC following a ceremony marking Old Crow's declaration of the state of emergency. Everything is changing right in front of our eyes. In the U.S., Mike Rossman, a clinical psychologist working with farmers, wrote a heartbreaking article for the New Republic about depression among farmers in the wake of historic flooding that ravaged the Midwest. Rossman detailed the psychological and personal pain he is experiencing while working with suicidal farmers as the direct human toll of climate disruption becomes more apparent in the U.S. Meanwhile, the refugee crisis from rising seas and extreme weather events continues apace in Bangladesh. Although one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to sea level rise, it is now estimated that more than 10 million people there are estimated to lose their livelihoods in the next decade. The larger cities are already overwhelmed with the number of people streaming into them from the submerging coastal areas. Water, climate disruption amplified, food-induced extreme weather events continue to make their mark around the planet. Cyclone Kenneth, the largest storm to ever strike Mozambique, left 38 people dead. That storm followed Cyclone Idai, which struck a few weeks prior, killing 600. In Canada, experts warn that climate disruption will continue to exacerbate extreme flooding across parts of the country. Thousands of people across eastern Canada were forced to evacuate their homes due to flooding as the second of two 100-year floods struck Quebec in the last 3 years. In the U.S., things are no better after a $14 billion upgrade to in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans levees are sinking due to sea level rise and ground subsidence and will be rendered inadequate within 4 years. Wow. The devastating flooding a few months ago, or maybe last year sometime, I said it's a good time to leave South Florida, Miami, and New Orleans. It's a good time to leave those cities if you have the wherewithal and you have the foresight, because you don't know when a climate catastrophe is going to strike your city because the sea levels are already high and you're just waiting for a big old storm to come in and go boink, and then New Orleans looks like it did 15 years ago right away. The devastating flooding that has racked farmers in the Midwest and wiped out crops, ruined stored crops, and drowned livestock is due to abnormally warmer eastern Pacific waters, according to scientists. Just after the U.S. wrapped up its wettest 12 months on record, storms dumped enormous rainfalls across Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Scientists warn that the extreme weather Houston is currently experiencing is no anomaly. It is what the area can expect regularly from now on. Record-breaking spring high temperatures across the Pacific Northwest has people in the Seattle region worried about drought, as intense heat in May has caused the snowpack, at only 58% of normal anyway, across Washington state to melt away far more rapidly than normal. When you look at some of the snowpacks in some of the basins, it looks like they're doing a swan dive off a cliff. Jeff Marti, a state ecology department official, told the Seattle Times. Washington Governor Jay Inslee has already issued drought emergency declarations in the Okanogan, Methau, and Upper Yakima watersheds due to the low snowpack in the mountains. Experts recently warned that the Hawaiian Islands are under severe threat from rising sea levels. The iconic Waikiki Beach and other well-known areas of the islands will experience chronic flooding and could disappear underwater forever within the next 15 to 20 years. Good Lord. Scientists also recently announced that global sea levels could reach a 2-meter rise by 2100. The warning effectively doubles the previous worst-case scenario provided by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, published in 2013. This new warning means that large portions of numerous major coastal cities will be completely submerged, according to Jonathan Bamber of the University of Bristol. If we see something like that in the next 80 years, we are looking at social breakdown on scales that are pretty unimaginable. If we have 80 years, everybody should be kicking their heels with joy. In the icy realms of Earth, things continue to deteriorate rapidly. Scientists recently announced if we have 8 years, people should be kicking their heels with joy. Scientists recently announced that a major breeding ground for emperor penguins has gone barren since 2016. This means that virtually nothing has hatched in the area, which is the second largest breeding ground for the penguins in the Antarctic. Things are looking just as bleak for this year. Scientists have also found what they call extraordinary thinning of ice sheets deep within Antarctica. The affected areas are losing ice 5 times faster than they did during the 1990s, some areas having lost 100 meters of thickness. A quarter of the western Antarctic ice sheet is now considered unstable. The northwest section of the Ross Ice Shelf, which bounds the WAIS, is the size of France, is melting 10 times faster than the global average. According to one 2016 study, if all of the WAIS melts, 17 feet of global sea level rise is projected to be the result. Up in the Arctic, things are just as bad. April saw a new record low in Arctic sea ice extent. Another report revealed how thawing permafrost across the Arctic will amount to a $70 trillion impact. Methane and CO2 released from the thawing will accelerate global warming by amplifying it nearly 5%. Additionally, yet another recent permafrost study has revealed widespread degradation of it across the high Arctic terrain to an extent worse than previously understood. On the other side of the water spectrum, drought has impaired shipping through the Panama Canal, whose waters have precipitously lowered. The canal level is not connected to sea levels. Hence, drought conditions are impacting the functionality of the critical shipping lane. Panama's Canal Authority recently had to impose draft limits on ships using the canal. This means that heavily laden cargo ships, namely from the U.S. and China, had to pass through with less of their cargo. Fire. Just 4 months into 2019, the UK has already had more large wildfires than it had during the entirety of 2018. That's the winter of 2019. Rescue personnel stated that the scale and duration of the fires had already been a huge draw on fire and rescue service resources. In Germany, the risk of wildfires has spiked amidst ongoing drought and high temperatures across most of the country. Back in the U.S., wildfires that ravaged California last year were the most expensive in the state's history, totaling $12 billion in damages. More than 80 people were killed in the fires, in addition to them leaving large areas of toxic waste that needs now to be remediated. Air. A recent report shows how much warmer cities across the U.S. will be within one generation by 2050. Every season and every city and town in America will shift subtly and drastically as average temperatures creep up along with highs and lows, reported Vox, which released the report. Some of those changes, like summers in the Southwest warming by 4 degrees Fahrenheit on average, will mean stretches of days where it's so hot it'll be dangerous to go outside. Heat waves around the country could last up to a month. Earth experienced its second warmest April on record, ranking only behind April 2016. It also marked the 412th consecutive month and 43rd straight April that global temperatures have been above the 20th century average, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. In the northwestern Russian city of Arkhangelsk, Near the entrance to the Arctic Ocean, a temperature of 84 degrees Fahrenheit was recently registered, 30 degrees Fahrenheit higher than normal for this time of year. 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, Earth's CO2 levels for the first time in human history reached 415 parts per million, the last time there was this much CO2 in the atmosphere. Global average temperatures averaged between 40°C to 10°C warmer than they are today, depending on the location around the planet. Denial and reality. The U.S. is now one of the world's leaders when it comes to climate change denial. A recent polling of the 23 largest countries in the world found that 13% of Americans believe the climate change is being disrupted. Climate is being disrupted, but that humans are not the cause, in addition to another 5% of Americans who believe climate is not changing at all. The only other countries that are more anti-science than the U.S. are Saudi Arabia and Indonesia, according to the survey. This information shouldn't be a total shock given the ongoing denialist machinations of the Trump administration, which recently objected to having climate change even referenced in a U.S. statement for the Arctic Council. Additionally, Trump's EPA head was recently asked to back up his absurdly anti-science claim that climate disruption is still 50 to 75 years out. If you haven't been watching the weather reports in the news in the last couple of months, it's already here. Adding fuel to the denial fire, Trump's Interior Secretary recently told lawmakers that he hasn't lost sleep over the record CO2 levels in the atmosphere. It's worth remembering that the U.S. is responsible for emitting more CO2 into the atmosphere than any other country on Earth. On the other hand, nearly half of younger Americans between the ages of 18 to 29 years believes human-caused climate disruption is a crisis and demand urgent action, according to a recent poll. Another poll found that more than 80% of parents in the U.S. want climate disruption taught in the schools of their children. Among all parents, 2/3 of Republicans and 9 out of every 10 Democrats agreed the subject should be taught in school. That's a pretty clear majority. 2/3 of Republicans and 9 out of 10 Democrats understand that climate change is real. So, denialists, wake up, get with the program, and stop getting in the way. With the ongoing acceleration of the climate crisis, it is clear that even if we believe the best case scenarios, governments are not reacting according to the gravity of the situation at hand. Of course they're not. Each one of us, knowing what we know now, must take full responsibility for preparing ourselves for the adaptation required to live on this increasingly warming, melting world as civilizations and societies continue to disintegrate. Sometimes it is very difficult to read Dar Jamal's articles because they're just a laundry list of cataclysm. I started reading this article last night, and 2 or 3 paragraphs in, I was just overwhelmed with. I was just like, it was like a physical feeling of fear and dread and grief, like just whacked me, and it's the brunt of the reality of it is very hard to grapple with. And so, I understand that it's easier to just live in the moment and find what joy we can. And that's, that is what I do with my life. However, I do it with the knowledge of what is, happening, what is currently going to transpire on this planet. And with the knowledge that action needs to be taken, and that people that are taking action should be supported, and that people that are taking action and people are talking about this problem should be listened to and supported, and not run away from or hid from or silenced. It is hard information to take in, and I understand that. And I understand that's probably what's behind a lot of people's, optimism-only outlooks. I get it. I totally get it. Just don't be so wrapped up in the optimism that you just don't, I mean, I guess some people understand what the problem is, and they're just going to live like nothing's wrong and go over the falls when it's time to go over the falls. I guess that's one way to do it. I don't know. I don't know that there's a wrong way to do it. I don't know that there's a right way to do it. There are many responses that can be taken to this news, to this information, and people have their own ways of dealing with it. I personally would like to see people accept the reality of it and move in their lives as if they accepted the reality of it, because they would do much less damage. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.